Welcome to Filmability. My name's Joel Fisher, and this is a podcast all about disability in cinema. I've also written a book called Filmability, A History of Disability in Cinema, and I wrote it because I love movies. I've always been obsessed with movies, but whenever there was a disabled character, I wouldn't quite understand what they were going for. There was something about it that wasn't quite right, and as a wheelchair user myself, I felt like there was something that was being represented that really wasn't true of real life. Disabled people are often seen as figures of inspiration or pity, and I didn't really consider myself to be either. I wasn't really doing anything that would inspire other people to live their lives better, and I certainly wasn't a figure of pity. I didn't want that at all. So, I've watched over 200 films, going through films that have main or pivotal supporting disabled characters, and tried to figure out what there was that was wrong, and try to figure out if there's any change, if things got better, or why there was a certain angle on disabled people that just put me off. This week I've decided to talk about a film from the 1980s, which is about a little boy who befriends an alien and they go on an amazing adventure, but it's not the one that you think it is. This is a film called Mac and Me from 1998, about a little boy who finds an alien after it stows away in the back of his car and craziness ensues. It's released in 1998, as I said, but it borrows heavily from E.T., so heavily that Steven Spielberg was once asked if he would sue the makers of the film because of the similarities between them, but he never thought he'd put somebody through such an ordeal as to watch the film in order to figure out if there were any differences or similarities that were enough to sue. So, in the next section, I'm going to talk a bit more about the film, and for those who haven't seen it, maybe get an idea of whether you want to see it or whether you've seen it before, whether there's a sort of memory in your childhood that flashes back to you. And it may even give a bit of context to people who have seen the GIF online or the little clip of the little boy in the wheelchair who flies off a hillside, over a cliff, into a lake, to which a little alien pops his head up. It's very strange out of context, but Mac and Me is the film that it came from. It's not a good film. It's one of those films that's so bad it's good, though. And the director, Stuart Raffle, seems to be the kind of person who has a sort of knack of doing that. He's had other films such as The Ice Pirates, Mannequin 2, On the Move, and Taming the T-Rex, and they're all cult classics, and they're all strangely watchable, even though they're really bad. So let's go through the film. On the moon, a family of aliens are trying to find water. The joke being that aliens aren't going to find water on the moon, or at least they aren't in 1988. But then they're sucked into a vacuum cleaner by an NASA astronaut who takes them to a facility on Earth and keeps them there for testing. But they escape due to their powers, which sort of vary throughout the film. And as they're going into the desert to try and escape from them, a passing car goes by, and the youngest of the family decided to get a lift. In the car are a woman and her two sons, Janet, played by Christian Ebersol, Michael, played by Jonathan Ward, and a little brother, Eric, played by Jake Caligari, who is also a wheelchair user. So they get to their new home, which is in LA. They're moving after the loss of their father, and they're going to start a new life. So it's just the mum and the two little boys. But when Matt gets into the house, he causes a problem, and the boys get blamed for it. However, Eric sees the little alien, and he goes after him in his wheelchair, and this is the point where that thing happens in the GIF. And I'll try to explain to you what would have happened if somebody were actually using a wheelchair, and how they could perhaps save themselves from doing what happened. If you're a wheelchair user and you find yourself at the top of a hill, consider if the hill is safe enough to go down without any help. If you need to go down, ask somebody to hold onto the handles of your chair if you have them, to help you ease down the steep incline. If you find your chair is moving down the hill unexpectedly, put your hands on the wheels to stop yourself from moving. Then you can either back up or turn around to get yourself back to a safe, even level. If you find that the hill is steeper than you expected, again put your hands on the wheels and attempt to back up or turn around. If you find this is difficult, then there is no shame of asking for help. Hopefully somebody you will trust will arrive and they can pull you back to safety, provided that they understand that once you are safe, they can let go of the chair. If your chair is moving down the hill faster than you expected, and your hands aren't quite enough to stop your momentum, put the brakes on by pushing down towards the wheel. Don't do what Eric did and pull up, which is probably why the brakes broke off in his hands in the first place. This is a very low chance of this happening to you, but if it does, then the best thing to do is not to panic. Also, keep in mind that just because the chair will stop doesn't mean that you will as well, and you may find your body has shifted forwards. If that's the case, then adjust yourself in the chair to a comfortable position. If all else fails and you do find yourself falling off a cliff to certain death, just make sure you're in a children's movie and that a small alien will decide to save you. So yes, this is what happens in the movie. Eric goes after the little alien, and for some reason his chair starts to move down a hill, and unlike most children who would put their hands on the wheels and stop themselves, Eric finds himself moving out of control. He starts picking up speed, and he gets to the point where he's on the edge of the cliff, and because his chair is moving so fast, it falls off the cliff into a lake at the bottom. And that's the GIF that you've all seen, or the clip, or I think that's something Paul Rudd does. He shows a clip on a chat show, and instead of what he wants to promote, and everyone has a laugh. It's one of those things. Yeah, so anyway, there's a passing. A little girl witnesses this, and she's named Debbie, and she's played by Lauren Stanley. And after this dramatic event, Eric and Debbie become friends, and they decide to try and track down the little alien and capture it. However, it's not going to be that easy, because they constantly use a vacuum cleaner, just like the astronaut did on the moon. And this causes a problem. It shorts out the device and causes a power problem in the local area. And again, it seems like Eric might get the blame for it. And this is also the point where Eric decides that his new little friend needs a name. The little alien is now called Mac, which officially stands for Mysterious Alien Creature. But the audience, perhaps the parents, are going to start to realise that maybe they've been led down a path of product placement. Because Mac, in a film which is heavily involved with McDonald's, it would remind them of a Big Mac. Anyway, the next scene, they're in a McDonald's. What a coincidence. And they're drinking Coca-Cola, everyone's having a great time, and the FBI are after Mac, and he decides that the best course of action is to cause a distraction by starting a dance routine in the middle of a McDonald's, which goes on for about 4.5 minutes in the movie. Again, this is a clip that's on YouTube. You can look it up if you want to watch how insane this is. Much like the clip where Eric falls off the cliff, out of context, it's very odd, but in the film, it's still quite odd. So by this point, Eric and Mac tried to escape, and this is one of the bits that's reminiscent of E.T., because it's about a little boy on wheels with an alien on his lap trying to escape from the FBI. And there are 2 FBI agents, and quite frankly, if they are unable to catch a little boy in a wheelchair, then they're not doing their job properly, or they're not even trying. So by this point, Janet, Eric's mum, has got wind of what's going on, and she wants to try and help. So with help from Mac, who knows the directions to where to go to get to his family, they find them in the desert, and they're really weak because they haven't had any water. But the best thing that they have that could help them is Coca-Cola. More product placement, unfortunately. And Coca-Cola brings them back to life and makes them stronger, but they can't quite get to the level that they need to be at, so they have to go to a supermarket and buy more Coca-Cola. Can you hear it? Buy more Coca-Cola. Anyway, they go to the supermarket, and this is probably not the best idea for them to do, because a family of aliens in broad daylight at a supermarket are bound to cause a bit of a stir, which happens, and is exasperated by Mac's father, who grabs the gun of a passing police officer, and a shootout ensues, in which Eric gets shot in the process. And thanks to the healing powers of Coca-Cola, they've got their powers back, and they're able to bring Eric back to life. And thanks to their efforts, the US government decides to give them a medal and full US citizenship, which includes clothes and a car, and they all live happily ever after. Like I said, it's enough to remind the audience of E.T., but perhaps not enough to get them sued. But there's definitely a thread where they really didn't think that there was any better ideas. Mac and Me is like somebody who was drunk told the story of E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial to somebody who was stoned, and from the next day they made a movie. It's that crazy. So if you have ever wondered if you wanted to watch a film, give it a try. I think it might even be on YouTube. You didn't hear that from me, though. So now I've talked about the craziness of the film, let's talk a bit more about behind the scenes, and in particular a detail which I didn't know until I researched it much later. That is the fact that Jade Calgary, who played Eric, is a wheelchair user and has spina bifida like I do. And this makes me feel... Well, I mean, particularly, I feel like I should have known this at the time, because I would have felt a lot better. Back then, I thought I just saw a kid in a wheelchair, somebody who had no experience with disability, and it was just so often the kind of thing that they would do in those days, and even now. But to give a disabled child a chance in a movie brings more authenticity to the role, and it makes other disabled kids perhaps feel like they were reflected in the film, because Eric's disability doesn't play any part in the plot of the film, and he's just treated the same as everybody else, and that reflected how I was. I was just a kid in a wheelchair, and that was all it was. However, for the next part, I'm going to explain to you a bit more about spina bifida and how it does affect people in their everyday lives. Spina Spinal bifida is caused by an enclosed neural tube defect. These disorders happen when the spine has abnormal forms of fat, bone, or meninges. Many of these neural tube defects require surgery in childhood, and people with these types of spinal bifida may have leg weaknesses and trouble controlling their bowels and bladder. There are 3 types of spinal bifida. There's myelin-meningocele, a form of spinal bifida in which the spinal cord and nerves develop outside of the body and are contained in a fluid-filled sac that is visible outside of the back area. There's meningocele, which happens when the protective layers of the spine, called meninges, stick out through the spine and expose a sac of spinal fluid on the back. This sac contains no nerves and may or may not be covered by a layer of skin. People with meningocele may have minor symptoms. And then finally there's a coulter, which occurs when one or more of the bones of the spine is not formed correctly. People with the coulter, the word meaning hidden, don't have any of the symptoms, and it's usually discovered in x-rays. People with spinal bifida are often born with hydrocephalus, a condition commonly known as water on the brain, which can be regulated by surgically implanting it into a person's head. The condition is caused by a build-up of cerebrospinal fluid in the brain. The fun facts also about spinal bifida are that 60% of people who have spinal bifida also have a latex allergy. And no, I did not find out the hard way. Don't ask. They are also more prone to having a learning difficulty when it comes to reading and maths. And personally speaking, I could definitely say that I have a problem with maths. Reading not so much, but I took my maths GCSE 3 times and I didn't even need it. Although if you are listening and you are taking your GCSEs at the moment or you're preparing for them, you do need them. They are important and I hope you do well. In cinematic terms, The Devil's Backbone refers to a 2001 movie directed by Guillermo del Toro. It's about a boy who goes to an orphanage, and only to realise that the place is haunted. The Devil's Backbone is also a slang term for spinal bifida, and it was used by people who thought that the spinal bifida was the devil's work, and they were discarded and shut away because they didn't understand. Although personally, if people were to ask me about my disability, I would rather say I had the devil's backbone, because then they have no other follow-up questions. Probably because they're too afraid to ask. Famous people with spinal bifida include Paul Dark, who is an activist and a writer on disability in cinema. In the music world, there is Hank Williams and Lucinda Williams, who are both singers. They're not in the same genre. They're definitely not in the same decade. And also, John Mellencamp also had spinal bifida. In the acting world, there's Ruth Madeley and Rosie Ellis, both British actresses. David Proud, who's English, as well as Bruce Payne, an actor best known for roles such as the villain in Passenger 57 and 2000's Dungeons and Dragons. In other areas of life, there's Dame Tanny Gray-Thompson, who's a former Paralympian and member of the House of Commons. There's Mark Lane, who's a broadcaster and writer, and Adrian V. Stokes, who helped to implement the EMR system in the UK, and also Justin Yoder, who was a soapbox racer, but I'll get back to him later. Getting back to the film though, on IMDb there is a line that explains the plot of The Mac and Me by saying, an alien trying to escape from NASA is befriended by a wheelchair-bound boy. And unfortunately this isn't entirely accurate, because being wheelchair-bound is not really a thing, because nobody is bound to a wheelchair, and it implies that having to use a wheelchair is a chore, and that it gives disabled people no better option than to use one. Wheelchairs are freeing. They enable me to move around and I go to places that I wouldn't be able to go to otherwise without it. In fact, I wouldn't be able to go anywhere without it. So it's not a tool that I'm bound to. It's something that helps me in my everyday life. Also, let's talk about access, because although the term wheelchair bound implies that I am bound to a wheelchair and that I have no other choice of going anywhere, I can't go anywhere unless there are the proper facilities made accessible to me. So, for example, a ramp, a toilet in which I can change or go for a wee if I want to. If you don't have any of those, then that's not me, that is you. I am not bound to the way that you are not accommodating for me. So, if you're thinking about adding access to a building or a room or a area, then it's probably better if you consult a disabled person, because believe me, I have had many problems. I have had issues in bathrooms. I have had lifts that I've been stuck in because they've put in a small lift and thought that that would do. It won't, and it needs to be better. Finally, I wouldn't be doing a film podcast if I didn't talk a little bit about the trivia. This is Jennifer Aniston's first movie. She's in the background somewhere. I can't find her, but if you can find her, then please let me know. Also, Angelica Houston and Kim Basinger were both offered the part of Janet, and they turned it down, and I'm sure they didn't regret it. Finally, the proceeds for this film went to Ronald McDonald's House Charities, a charity set up to help children and their families when their children have to go to hospital. Which is a shame, because the film only made $6 million from a $13 million budget. It was only released in the US as well, which may have been part of the reason why it lost so much money, but also the quality of the film wasn't that great either. Overall, I just wish it had done better for the charity. And that's it for me this week. Next week I'll be talking about Mercury Rising, an action movie with Bruce Willis about an autistic boy who solves a code that puts him in danger. If you'd like to contact me, you can do so by searching for film-ability at Bluesky, by searching for film_ability at Instagram, and if you'd like to email me, my address is film-ability@outlook.com. And if you'd like to make a contribution to the things that I do here, you can find me at Patreon at patreon.com/film-ability. You can also find my book at Amazon on Kindle and paperback called Film Ability, A History of Disability in Cinema. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.